You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is a solved case about Giulia Tofana and how she killed 600 abusive husbands with makeup. This is a vintage story that seems much more like a psychological thriller than a true story. Yet hundreds of men were really murdered by one woman who would operate for the next 20 years with no one finding out a thing. Plenty of people were willing to cover up for her because she wasn't the only one in danger of being executed. I also want to take a moment to talk about something that's happening in our world right now and needs urgent help, and I want to bring awareness to Sophie Long, the 9-year-old girl. There's a lot of social media outrage for her, and there should be. So Sophie Long is a little girl who has been seen in videos crying and screaming, not wanting to go home. Now, Sophie has been trying to tell everybody in her life, including Child Protective Service workers, that she is being sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend and that she does not want to go home and nobody is listening to her. She goes to her father's house, and her father and mother are separated. So she goes to her father's house occasionally, and when she has to do the trade-off and go back to her mother, that is when her father has recorded her screaming and crying and begging not to go back to that home. And the father can do nothing about it right now because he does not have custody of her, and he has to legally give her back to her mother where she does not want to go. Like I said, CPS or Child Protective Services is doing nothing to help Sophie, and they have sided with the mother in the fact that she said nothing is happening and Sophie made it all up. Now, most of you know that I have dealt with the foster care system growing up, and my parents did foster care, and we know, we've dealt with CPS a lot, and we've had a lot of bad experiences with them, and it breaks my heart that Sophie is having a bad experience as well, and a horrific one at that. And it's really hard for me to talk about this case and to look into it at all because it brings up a lot of bad memories for me, but I knew it was important to share this with you guys and to have you guys go to the hashtag #IStandWithSophie to look up more information to see what you can do to help. And there will also be a GoFundMe linked below, and that's raising money for her father to be able to fight for custody of Sophie and keep her out of harm's way. We don't know a lot about Sophie's case, but she needs help urgently, and we can't wait until there's a full case to report on to get that help out. So please do some research on I Stand With Sophie and do anything you can to help, because this little girl should not be going through something so horrific and should not be shut down by people who call themselves Child Protective Services. They're not protecting her at all. I post content like this all the time. It is my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if it's something you would like to support me in doing, all you have to do is make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on so you get notifications when I post. Give this video a thumbs up and leave a nice comment down below. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1633 in Italy, and we will be starting at a place called Palermo. Here, an execution would occur. You see, it was July 12th, and a woman called Tofana di Adama was charged with murdering her husband. Now, his name was Francis, and when he was found dead, fingers immediately pointed at his wife. She would end up dying for the crime. Since this was so long ago, nobody can be certain if she really did murder her husband or if she was wrongfully convicted. But what would happen next would make many believe that Tofana knew exactly what she was doing when she murdered her husband, and that murder would run in the family. You see, Tofana and Francis had a daughter who had been born 13 years prior, and her name was GiuliaTofana. Now, Giulia may have only been a teen when she lost both of her parents, but this wouldn't stop her from becoming a strong, successful woman. She would later get married and have a daughter named Giulia, and at this point they were all living in Naples when her husband died as well, and so after she became a widow, she moved with her daughter to Rome, and there Giulia was known as this stunning woman who had a business of her own, which was quite impressive during this time when women were looked down upon so greatly, and Giulia actually sold makeup. She had her own cosmetics line to sell to the women of Italy who loved her products. Everyone wanted to get their hands on Giulia's creations, but no one knew the truth behind what they really were. Well, a lot of people didn't, but some people did. Some of the people buying them. But to make you understand the urgency of Giulia's products, I have to explain a little about how the women were treated in the Renaissance era. Because the rights and privileges of women were quite slim. You see, control over their lives began at a young age with their father and only continued on to adulthood when they would be forced into marriages with males that their families had picked. They often didn't even want to be wives, but they couldn't say no. They didn't have a choice on what was happening, who it was happening with, and suddenly their husband now had control over them instead of their father, but they never had control over themselves. If being in a marriage they didn't want was bad enough, it was then said that it would just get worse because men during this time were the head of the household and they often took advantage of this role. Many husbands viewed their wives as objects that they could control, and the worst part was they knew the wives couldn't do anything about it. Women had no financial, social, political power. They would be beaten and tortured, often for no reason at all, and other people seeing women with bruises wouldn't bat an eye. They wouldn't help them if they were crying for help because this was so normal. They were cheated on all the time, but the mistresses weren't treated any better. They were just treated basically as sex objects for these husbands. But they all still played the role of the good wife because that's what they were supposed to do, and that would keep them from being beaten. Yet most of the time, none of them wanted to be wives at all. Now, a man named William Chambers kind of wrote about this time period and the thoughts that were running through everybody's mind, and I think it kind of gives you an insight into how people were thinking. And he said, "When baseness, deceit, cruelty, and selfishness are combined in the character of public men, the profession of secret murder becomes one of the fine arts. In fact, so callous do people grow, do they cease thinking of killing as murder, but simply as the removal of a hateful object." And that's kind of just a sneak peek into the case we are going to be getting into. Women knew that this horrific cycle was something they were going to have to deal with. They were either preparing to be in this situation or already living in it. And they knew that divorce was not granted at this time. So they would be stuck in this situation forever unless there was another way out. And that is where Giulia would come in. Giulia was said to have a deep desire to help these women, to want to get them out of these horrible situations, especially women who didn't have a lot of money or didn't come from a family with a lot of money who needed help. And this was said to stem from Giulia's own childhood, where she witnessed her mother being abused by her father and ultimately saw the freedom that her mother experienced when her father died, before, of course, she was executed. But what I didn't tell you about her mother's execution was that it was believed that her mother actually poisoned her father. It wasn't natural causes that left her a widow and left Giulia without a father. The only problem with that plan was that she was eventually caught. But as an adult, Giulia was said to start creating a better plan, stemming off of what her mother had already created. If she was going to help these women get away from their abusive husbands, there needed to be no evidence of murder. That's where her makeup business came in. Yet Giulia didn't really use all of the normal ingredients in makeup. She did use some, but Giulia was known to spend quite a bit of time with apothecaries, and these are people who created or sold medicine back in this time. They were basically pharmacists, but they would kind of concoct their own medicine from scratch, and she would often watch them do so to learn how. So why would she need medicine to create beauty products? But women around Italy slowly began to hear about the one woman who could change their lives forever. Husbands began to perish more and more wives were becoming widows. Everyone was dying from natural causes. No doctors could figure out what happened to them. Their bloodstreams showed no sign of poison, they had no physical injuries either, and no autopsy unearthed the cause of death in any of these victims. But that's exactly what Giulia had planned. You see, Giulia had created an entire cosmetics line to cover up the fact that she was selling poison. This quickly became an empire, like Kylie Cosmetics today. The only difference? Her ingredients were deadly. The best-selling products came in the form of powdered makeup and small bottles of face cream and oil, and they looked extremely legit too, like things you could just have on your vanity, out and about, and nobody would ask what they were. They were just beauty products. No man cared about your beauty products, so it could just sit there and not look suspicious at all. The packaging was actually images of Saint Nicholas of Bari, making the products look sleek and elegant and expensive and not worth a second glance. It was actually theorized that the reason that Giulia used the Saint Nicholas on the packaging was due to the fact that he was known to save and protect young girls from having to be out on the streets and would pay for their dowries, or basically fees that women had to pay to get into marriages. But Giulia wanted to save women from marriages altogether, and she figured the best way to do so was to make it blend in and look completely innocent. And in fact, there was already a healing oil for blemishes at the time called Mana of St. Nicholas of Bari. So she kind of just backpacked off this idea to make it seem even more real. Not many knew the ins and the outs of Giulia's cosmetics line, and that's what made it so successful. Her daughter was working for her at the time, and they had a small group of women they could count on to keep this a secret. However, it was also said that there was a whole criminal magical underworld where witchcraft and poison was already sold and existed. Yet even to the people who knew that Giulia was selling these poisons and her real motives, none of them thought that she was this criminal mastermind. They looked at her as their hero. She was a friend to the lower class women who needed help and could not get it with money, could not get it at all. Now, Giulia also had recruited a local Roman priest named Father Girolamo, who would supply the poison at this time for her to use. His brother was said to be an apothecary, and he would get it through him and give it to Giulia. But how did no one detect foul play in all of these deaths? How could poison be administered to abusive husbands without them knowing? This was said to be because of a particular poison that Giulia used that was thought to be given to her by her mother when her mother poisoned her father. This was called aqua Tofana. She was believed to be taught how to make it and how to use this poison by her mother's friend Francesca Lasarda, who worked with her mother prior to her mother's execution, and after her mother's execution decided to teach her daughter how to use all this so the legacy could continue and she could use it if she needed it. However, Francesca had sold all these poisons to the wealthy upper class at this time and then taught Giulia, but after this, a year after Giulia's mother's execution, Francesca was actually executed for the same thing as well. That's when, as a young girl, Giulia began to plan her cosmetics line, a dream that many young girls have, except hers had a very dark twist, a twist of murder. You see, this poison could be hidden in plain sight, like I said, right on the vanity, like harmless makeup. Yet on the inside, it was said to be colorless, tasteless, scentless, and untraceable. It was completely deadly within 4 to 6 drops. corpse. Aqua Tofana was said to be made of arsenic, lead, antimony, and mercuric chloride. There was also belladonna inside. And this was thought to be something that was already used in cosmetics at this time. Belladonna was actually made into infused droplets that women would put into their eyes so their pupils would basically appear larger, and men really liked this look. They said it was more alluring, and so women would literally put this belladonna in their eyes to make their pupils bigger. But no one actually ingested this belladonna before because it was known as nightshade, and if you ate these actual berries, it would cause death. So Giulia decided to use this that was already in makeup, but make it deadly. This concoction of Aqua Tofana would mimic a common cold in the beginning. It was something that often caused deaths in this era, and nobody could really cure before someone succumbed to death. So basically, it appeared just like a natural cause. It would take days to fully kill, and when a wife would meet Giulia to ask her for some makeup, Giulia would know exactly what she was asking for: a way out, help. So they would take this makeup home, and they wouldn't have to worry about it being caught by their abusive husband because they could hide it. And then when they were ready, they would take it out as they were preparing the meal for their husband, as wives often did during this time, as they were expected to do, and they would put it either in food or liquid, and they would put the first dose into their husband's meal. Upon eating this, he would become weak and exhausted. But the second dose was when they really started to show symptoms. The husbands would have stomach aches, dehydration, vomiting, and to them, all they did was have a meal. They drank some water and they fell ill. So this to them really was that they were just sick. Normally, within this week, they would be deceased. Yet, they still had enough time to sign their wills and give everything they had to their wives. Chambers' journal wrote about this time: to save her fair fame, the wife would demand a post-mortem exam. Result: nothing, except that the woman was able to pose as a slandered innocent, and then it would be remembered that her husband died without either pain, inflammation, fever, or spasms. If, after this, the woman within a year or two formed a new connection, nobody could blame her. And this was said to be all planned out by Giuliana herself, who would teach these women how to administer the poisons and how to act after they started getting sick and after they died, like they were distraught and anxious and like they couldn't believe their loving husband just died. Meaning that these women, with previously no hope for their lives, finally had some power. Yet to do so, they were all becoming murderers. Now, because of these results, because they got what they wanted, their husbands were dead and they were not in jail or executed, no widow was ever going to come forward saying where they got this poison or, the real meaning of Giulia's business and what she was really selling. So it was safe. It was quite a secret, even from the people who actually got this poison. No one knew what she was doing, even the police, and for 20 years, their products were in high demand. It even began to be marketed as a face cream for women to appear beautiful and look single again. However, Giulia was still very cautious. She didn't sell to just anyone. In fact, she had to have people vouch for her new clients. So her old clients had to vouch for new ones to be able to get this poison. She wouldn't just take outsiders who she didn't know she could trust. Because her old clients, the ones who had already committed murder, already had something to lose. If she got in trouble, they could get in trouble too. So nobody was going to speak out against her. It was a close community that trusted one another with their secrets. And it was said that over 600 men had been poisoned by Giulia's makeup at this point. But no one ever created a portrait of Giulia, revealing her identity, and it was said that she kept her life really secret. This business wouldn't last forever though. After 20 long years, it was now 1650 and everything would be exposed. A woman had gotten her makeup from Giulia and had taken it home to kill her husband, the normal plan. She was going to put it in his soup for dinner, and this is exactly what she did. She set down the soup and he began to eat it when she began to panic. She immediately started yelling at him and told him not to eat the soup, to put down the spoon, and he then got really freaked out by this and started beating her, demanding to know why she was yelling at him to not eat the soup. And that's when she had no choice but to tell him her plan, that she was going to kill him. At this point, he, of course, called the police and told the authorities that his wife was planning to kill him and that she had attempted murder. She was brought in for questioning and immediately confessed, saying that she had bought this poison, and pointed the fingers right at Giulia. After 20 years, her business had finally been outed, but Giulia had lots of contacts and people who were willing to protect her at all costs. Some say she was warned by authorities who knew her and decided not to arrest her, and others say that she fled herself after hearing from the community and that she ran away. But either way, she was gone in an instant and wasn't arrested at this time. She was said to make it to a church and ask for sanctuary, and she went into hiding, but she refused to stop making this poisonous makeup for these women who needed it. And so she continued to make it, but it would be distributed by a network of nuns. However, not long after, there was a rumor spread that Giulia was putting aqua Tofana in the local water supply to poison the town. With the town in fear and infuriated that they were keeping this person safe who was trying to kill everybody in the town, they barged into this church and they took Giulia to the authorities. There she would be tortured for hours, for days, endlessly, until she finally confessed to poisoning men. She said she had poisoned them for years, and with no remorse, it was about 600 men that she had done this to, possibly over, between the years of 1633 and 1651. Now, some of these vintage stories that I researched with these crazy numbers of victims make it hard to believe it's real. However, in this case, I think it's even more jarring and legit that she would have done this to 600 men, because it wasn't her doing it to every man. It was her supplying the poison to these women who wanted out of these situations. So it's much more likely that she could have gotten to 60 men through all of these women. Giulia knew the punishment for this would be death, and in July of 1659, this is exactly what would happen to her, as well as her own daughter who worked with her. This would mean that 3 generations of this family had been executed for murder, for poisoning. But 3 of their employees were also executed as well, and this was all done at Rome's Campo di Fiori, and this is a square where many hangings and burnings at the stake would occur. It was said that Giulia's dead body was then thrown over the wall into the church that had once hidden her. But as far as her clients and the women who actually committed the murders, well, at the time, it was thought that she named around 40 of them, and they couldn't connect every single one of them to murder because, like I said, it was natural causes and no one could find anything in the autopsies. But it was also hard to figure out what clients just came in to buy makeup from her and what ones actually came to buy this poison. But even with that, some of these clients were said to be executed as well. Others were bricked into dungeons at the Palazzo Pucci, and they died slowly of starvation or dehydration. And a lucky few, they were considered lucky, were actually strangled in prison, or they were so wealthy and high up that they actually got away with it completely. But although Giulia was gone, her poison was not, And although many wanted to believe that Giulia was the only one who knew her mixture well enough to recreate it, it was said that many of the apothecaries knew what she used. In fact, Father Palermo, who was responsible for getting her the ingredients, was never executed like many of the people who worked for her were. And it was said that people who weren't executed who did work for her fled. And it was theorized that they all later came together and began to produce Acqua Tofana again for years to come. It was said that the way in which it was distributed through the cosmetics line died out because, of course, authorities knew what was actually happening. Now, no one knows how long this was actually sold, how many knew the ingredients were in it, and how many were actually killed with it, and if it's still around today. However, the fear surrounding this was huge for hundreds of years. In fact, in 1791, it was still a fear many had that when they were sick, they were actually being poisoned. A man fell ill at the age of 35. He claimed it was Acqua Tofana. He said, "I feel definitely that I will not last much longer. I am sure that I have been poisoned. I cannot rid myself of this idea. Someone has given me Acqua Tofana and calculated the precise time of my death." This was Mozart, the Mozart, the composer that we all know. However, his cause of death, is still unknown today, and so it was just theorized that he was paranoid. He knew about this case, about Acqua Tofana, and he was worried that that had happened to him, but this has never been proven. But this just shows how infamous Giulia really was. It was believed when this cosmetics line was the most popular, many women bought this, and they didn't have any intention on actually using it, but they bought it kind of as like a protection for themselves, a means of control. They felt like if they had this on their counter, it gave them that feeling of an out anytime they wanted. If they actually got the courage to do it, they could be free. So many literally just bought it to have as decoration. Now, poisoning as a means of killing was actually quite popular in the Renaissance era, and especially for women. Now, a historian named Annette Trubert even said that during this time, plays would often feature women applying face paint on stage to show women as being false and having a poisonous nature, and the makeup, of course, was due to the fact that GiuliaTofana created this poisonous makeup line. So, do you think that what these women did and what Giulia did was horrible, or was it needed? Was it their only option when they were in these abusive situations? Of course, today there is divorce, there is ways to get help if you were being abused. Back then, when it was their only option, do you see why? Do you see a self-defense motive in this, or is it murder is murder to you, and they were wrong? Do you think Giulia was doing this because she lived through the fear of her father abusing her mother and didn't want anybody to have to deal with that too? Actually, some believe that this was all fictional or, twisted throughout the years, and that GiuliaTofana was simply a successful woman with a business who was becoming powerful and wealthy, and men didn't like this, so they began to come up with this tale of her actually killing men, and that there were hundreds of men, because at this time, rumors about women were crazy. I mean, any woman who did anything even a little bit different, who had red hair, would be burned at the stake. They would be called witches, burned at the stake. And so many believe that she was actually just framed for this mass poisoning, and that she had this successful business and men wanted to tear her down for that. I think either way, this is a very interesting case. And, I personally, to me, even though murder is never a good option, and you shouldn't have to turn to that to get out of a bad situation, I can see why at this time in the world, when they had zero power, why they turned to that. Also, I want to remind you to check out #IStandWithSophie and get more involved with that if you haven't heard about it, or even if you have, continue to update yourself, and I will try as best I can to update, to look into it, but like I said, it is very, very hard, so I'm trying to, balance between being informed and being triggered by it. So And I don't say triggering lightly. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.